Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. "Where is the translator?" shouted the billionaire Ethan Carter in panic, making even the receptionist jump in her chair. On the meeting room table lay a crumpled fax full of French words, scribbled in small letters, forming what seemed like a diplomatic riddle. In the corner, a wall clock showed 14 minutes left until the deadline to sign a contract worth $80 million, reminding everyone that disaster was getting closer. "The contract is worth $80 million. Ethan threw his pen against the glass table, frustrated. "Call any translator, interpreter, French student, a bilingual parrot, anything," he growled at the operations manager. "We've already tried everyone, sir," the man replied, his voice trembling. "No one is answering." At that moment, the metallic sound of a cleaning cart interrupted the tension. The door opened quietly, and Lila Harper, the new night shift cleaning lady, entered, pushing the cart. She didn't know if she should stop, turn back, or pretend to be invisible, but the atmosphere in the room caught her attention. She took a step, glanced at the fax on the table, and hesitated, wiping her hands on her apron. "Do you need some help?" Everyone in the room froze. Ethan raised an eyebrow as if she had just said she could fly a rocket. "Help? You speak French?" he asked, scanning her up and down. "Fluently," she replied without blinking. "Want me to translate?" The finance director let out a mocking chuckle. "Perfect. The cleaning lady will save $80 million. Why not?" Ethan ignored the remark, though his skepticism was obvious. "Sit down." He pulled out a chair roughly. "If you make a mistake, not only will you lose this job, but I'll personally make sure you never work here again." Lila didn't flinch. She sat calmly, as if she were about to clean a window instead of saving a multinational company, her eyes running across the lines quickly, like she knew exactly what to look for. 60 seconds later, she lifted her head. "Here, in Clause 14, she pointed with her finger, "you're about to give away vital rights to any future patents to the other company. That means any product you invent after this contract would belong to them too." The silence was deafening. The same director who laughed was now wide-eyed. "That was actually in the contract," he muttered. Ethan grabbed the fax, read the part she showed him, and frowned. His face, tense before, now carried a shadow of disbelief. "Go on." Lila translated the entire text out loud, clear and precise, adjusting technical terms as if it were something she did every day. At the end, she slid the paper back to him. "Now you can close the contract without falling into that trap. Just cross out this clause and suggest a change here and here." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to figure out whether she was real or just a vision caused by stress. "You just saved $80 million, and possibly my neck." Lila gave a half smile, stood up, and grabbed the handle of her cart. "Good to know. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an entire hallway to polish." The sound of the cart's wheels echoed down the hall as she left, disappearing from his sight. Ethan stood still, staring at the closed door. He didn't know if he was more upset that his luck had depended on a newly hired cleaning lady, or more intrigued by the way she handled the pressure, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "Find out who that woman is," he finally said without taking his eyes off the hallway, and while Lila kept working, unaware she had just become the most talked-about subject on the 28th floor, Ethan already knew his day, and possibly his life had just changed. Lila was scrubbing the floor of the ladies' restroom on the 15th floor when the executive secretary appeared at the door, clearly uncomfortable about stepping into cleaning territory. "Lila Harper?" she asked, checking a note. "Mr. Carter wants to see you in his office now." Lila looked at the bucket of dirty water, then at her gloved hands. "He knows I'm in the middle of my shift, right?" he said. "It's urgent." 15 minutes later, Lila knocked on the door of the executive office, still wearing her blue cleaning uniform. Ethan was behind the desk, shuffling papers, as if trying to look too busy to be nervous. "Sit down," he said without looking up. Lila settled into the leather chair that probably cost more than 3 months of her salary. "If this is about yesterday, I didn't tell anyone you almost lost $80 million because of a fax." Ethan finally looked at her. "Actually, that's exactly what this is about. I want to offer you a position." "A position as what?" "Head janitor, specialized translator." He leaned forward. "Salary 5 times higher than what you make now. International travel, your own office." Lila blinked a few times, processing. You're serious? Completely. The company needs someone with your skills. She crossed her arms, thoughtful. And if I say yes, what happens when you decide you'd rather hire someone with a framed diploma and an important last name? Ethan looked genuinely surprised by the question. Why would I do that? Because that's how the world works, Mr. Carter. Lila leaned back. People like me don't get offers like this without some kind of fine print. Then what's your counteroffer? Lila smiled. I'll accept, but I'll keep my cleaning job until I'm sure you won't change your mind in the first week. That's ridiculous. You can't do both jobs. Of course, I can translate by day, clean by night. Simple as that. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. You're more stubborn than any executive I've ever met. Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. By the end of the morning, the rumor had spread through every floor of the building. The new cleaning lady had become the official translator, yet she was still pushing a cleaning cart down the hallways at night. It's surreal, a receptionist said. Yesterday she was wiping my desk. Today she has her own office. I bet she won't last a week, her colleague replied. Lila was setting up her new desk when Victor Lang, the human resources director for 15 years and well known for resisting change, decided to test the newcomer. He called an impromptu meeting in the conference room, supposedly to officially introduce the new team member. Everyone. Victor clapped his hands for attention. Our new translator, Lila Harper, is going to tell us about her previous experience. The sarcastic tone didn't go unnoticed. Lila realized she was being tested in front of an audience. Of course, she said, standing calmly. My experience includes fluency in 5 languages, a degree in linguistics, and a few days observing how this office works. She paused for effect, which was more than enough to notice that you all panic faster than I can clean a room. A few nervous laughs echoed through the room, but Victor didn't let go. And you think that qualifies you to negotiate million-dollar international contracts? Well, Lila pretended to think. Yesterday, I saved $80 million while you were all in a panic. This morning, I translated 3 urgent emails that had been sitting on someone's desk for 2 days. She looked straight at Victor. And last night, I cleaned the meeting room where you left pizza stuck to the table. I'd say I have some multitasking experience. The room burst into laughter. Even the most serious assistant couldn't hold back a smile. Victor, red as a tomato, tried to regain control. That doesn't change the fact that you don't have real corporate experience. True, Lila agreed, but I also never almost destroyed a company because I couldn't read a contract in French. This time, the laughter couldn't be contained. 2 executives even clapped quietly. Ethan, who had slipped in silently and was watching from the doorway, fought not to smile openly. There was something about the way Lila diffused tense situations that fascinated him. She never lost her composure, never attacked personally, yet managed to turn the tables with wit and humor. I think we can consider introductions finished, Ethan finally said. Lila, you have 3 emails waiting for translation on your desk. When the meeting ended, Victor stormed past Lila, fuming, but she just waved politely. That was fun, said Thomas, one of the younger analysts. It's been a while since someone put Lang in his place. Lila packed up her things. I just told the truth. The truth tends to be funny when people don't want to hear it. Later, Ethan stopped by her office door. Lila was focused, translating a technical document, her brows drawn in concentration. How was the first official day? Educational. She looked up. I learned that some executives don't like it when the cleaning lady steps on their territory. And how do you plan to deal with that? Lila smiled. The same way I deal with tough stains, patience, the right product, and a little extra effort. Ethan found himself smiling back. There was something about her quiet confidence, the way she turned conflict into comedy, that made him curious about what other surprises Lila Harper was hiding under that blue cleaning uniform. Good luck with the night shift, he said as he stepped away. Thanks, boss, she replied, already back at work. I'll make sure your desk shines. And for the first time in years, Ethan Carter found himself eager to return to the office the next day. Lila had never set foot on a first-class plane. When Ethan mentioned she would travel to Paris as the company's official translator, she imagined an economy seat and a basic hotel. She didn't expect a seat that turned into a bed and a flight attendant offering champagne every 15 minutes. First time in France? Ethan asked, settled into the seat beside her, flipping through documents. First time outside the country, Lila admitted. still amazed by the size of the airplane window. "Do you always travel like this?" "It's work," he replied, but noticed how she looked at everything with genuine curiosity, not the fake interest he was used to seeing. When they arrived at the hotel in Paris, Lila headed to the reception desk with her simple suitcase, while Ethan spoke with the driver about the next day's schedule. "Bonjour," Lila said to the receptionist. "I have a reservation, Lila Harper." The Frenchwoman typed in the name, and her eyes widened. She looked Lila up and down, jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a plain blouse, then checked the screen again. "Madam Harper for the presidential suite." "The what suite?" Lila blinked. "I think there's been a mistake." At that moment, two butlers appeared out of nowhere. One took her suitcase and the other offered her a glass of crystal champagne. "Welcome, madam," said the first butler with a heavy French accent. "I am Pierre, your personal butler during your stay." "Personal butler?" Lila looked around, confused. "I only came here to work." "Of course," Pierre smiled. "The suite has a full office, a view of the Eiffel Tower, and a spa service available 24 hours. Lila tried to explain there must be a mistake, but she was already being escorted down a golden hallway with carpets that looked more expensive than her entire apartment. Ethan, who had witnessed the whole scene in the lobby, walked up to the receptionist. "What just happened?" "The system shows 2 reservations under Harper," the woman explained. "Lila Harper in the presidential suite and M. Harper in a standard executive room. And you assumed she was the presidential suite guest." "Well," the receptionist blushed. "Didn't you say she was an important employee?" Ethan almost laughed. "Let it be. She deserves it." Meanwhile, Lila was being led into a suite larger than her house with a living room, a bedroom with a king-size bed, a bathroom with a whirlpool tub, and a balcony with a direct view of the Eiffel Tower. "This is a huge mistake," she murmured, as Pierre opened bottles of imported mineral water. "Shall I prepare a relaxing bath?" the butler offered. "Or perhaps you would prefer that I arrange your clothes?" Lila looked at her small suitcase. "Pierre, I brought 3 changes of clothes and 1 extra pair of shoes. Nothing to organize." "Very well, madam." He nodded, completely serious. "Something simpler, then." "May I prepare a snack? We have Iranian caviar, smoked salmon. Do you have French fries?" Pierre looked genuinely puzzled. "French fries? Never mind. Lila, just let me know when it's time to work." The next day, the meeting was held in an elegant office in the center of Paris. The French investors, 3 middle-aged men in impeccable suits, waited with visible skepticism as Lila entered the room. "Bonjour," she greeted in perfect French, causing immediate surprise. For 2 hours, Lila not only translated, but also pointed out potential problems in the contracts, suggested changes that would protect both sides, and even managed to make the investors laugh with clever comments about cultural differences between Americans and the French. "This young lady is brilliant," the lead investor remarked to Ethan. "Where did you find her?" Ethan watched as Lila explained a complex clause as if she were telling an interesting story. "She found me," he answered, realizing it was true. When Lila suggested a change in how future dividends should be calculated, preventing a possible legal dispute 5 years down the line, even Ethan was impressed. She wasn't just translating words, she was understanding the spirit of the business. "Mademoiselle Harper, the oldest investor," said at the end, "if you ever decide to work in France, we will have a place for you." Lila smiled. "Merci. But Boston is starting to grow on me." At the post-meeting dinner in a charming restaurant near the Seine, Ethan finally relaxed. Lila had proven it wasn't beginner's luck, it was real competence. "How did you learn French so well?" he asked, cutting into the duck with orange sauce. "My grandmother used to watch French soap operas with subtitles," Lila said, tasting the red wine. "I watched with her and tried to repeat the lines. Later, I borrowed books from the library and practiced on my own." "On your own?" "I would talk to myself in French while cleaning the house." She laughed. The neighbors thought I was going crazy. Ethan found himself smiling genuinely this time. "And the other languages?" "Italian because of old movies. Japanese because I loved anime as a teenager. German because I wanted to understand the lyrics of classical music." Lila shrugged. "I've always liked to understand things fully, not just through translated fragments." "That's impressive." "It's not impressive," she corrected. "It's a necessity. When you don't have money to travel, You learn to travel through languages. Ethan stayed quiet for a moment. There was something in the simple way she spoke about limitations that made him question his own priorities. Is the hotel all right? He asked, changing the subject. Lila nearly choked on her wine. All right, Ethan. They gave me a butler who wants to arrange my 3 shirts as if they were crown jewels. Yesterday, he asked if I wanted caviar for breakfast. I asked for cereal and he almost fainted. Ethan laughed out loud. Pierre is a professional. Pierre is a saint. This morning he brought me croissants in bed and said it was standard protocol for VIP guests. Lila shook her head. I've never felt so important and so out of place at the same time. You're not out of place. Of course I am. She pointed to her simple dress. Yesterday, a woman in the lobby asked if I was someone's new assistant. When I said I was a translator, she looked confused, like translators couldn't possibly stay in expensive hotels. And what did you say? That I translate because important people can't manage it on their own. Lila smiled mischievously. She had no reply to that. Ethan realized he was enjoying that conversation more than the last 10 corporate meetings he had sat through. Lila had a way of seeing the world that felt refreshing, direct, unpretentious, but smart enough to carry any conversation. Tomorrow we head back to Boston, he said almost regretfully, and I'll go back to my normal apartment with my normal food, and no butler trying to polish my sneakers. Lila raised her glass. It's been an interesting adventure. The first of many, I hope. Lila looked at him a second longer than usual. We'll see, boss. We'll see. And when the waiter brought the check, Ethan caught himself thinking he much preferred dinners like that one over all the boring social events he usually attended. Lila stood in front of the mirror in the hotel's ladies' room, trying to convince herself that the black dress borrowed from Ethan's assistant wasn't too elegant for her. The event was a charity gala dinner, and she was there as the official interpreter for the international guests. You can do this, she whispered to her reflection. Just translate, smile, and don't spill wine on anyone important. When she left the restroom, Ethan was waiting in the lobby, straightening his tie. He stopped mid-movement when he saw her. You look, he began, then seemed to think better of it. I think so. Lila smoothed the dress nervously. Just promise me that if I say something silly in Italian to the ambassador, you'll give me an excuse to leave. Deal. The ballroom was filled with people who looked like they had stepped straight out of a celebrity magazine. Lila followed Ethan, greeting diplomats and business leaders, translating conversations about investments and international partnerships. Everything was going smoothly until a familiar voice called Ethan from across the room. Ethan, darling. Lila turned and saw a stunning woman approaching. Perfectly styled blonde waves, a designer dress that probably cost more than Lila's annual salary, and a smile that looked well rehearsed in front of a mirror. Elena, Ethan said, and Lila noticed how his voice suddenly became more formal. You look wonderful. Elena kissed his cheek, leaving a trace of pink lipstick. You haven't changed a bit. Lila pretended to be interested in the appetizers while watching the interaction. You didn't have to be a genius to realize this was the famous ex-fiancée. Helena, this is Lila Harper, our translator. Lila, Elena Grant. Elena extended her hand with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nice to meet you, translator. How interesting. Do you work freelance? Actually, I work for Carter and Hale. Lila shook her hand, noticing the perfectly manicured nails. Oh. Elena tilted her head, feigning interest. And how long have you been working with Ethan? The way she emphasized working didn't go unnoticed. A few weeks, Lila answered calmly. That's quick. Elena smiled at Ethan. You've always been efficient at finding new talent. Lila felt her cheeks warm but kept her composure. Actually, he found me cleaning his office bathroom. Elena blinked, confused. Excuse me. I was a cleaning lady before becoming a translator. Lila explained with an innocent smile. Quite a promotion from scrubbing toilets to dining with ambassadors. A few people nearby began paying attention to the conversation. Elena forced a laugh. What an unusual path. Ethan has always liked charity projects. That's true. Lila agreed, still smiling. He told me he also helped you once. Something about, what was it again? She pretended to think. Oh, yes, when you had to choose between 2 wealthy men and went with the richer one. The surrounding chatter stopped instantly. Ethan coughed, trying not to laugh. Elena flushed. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course. Lila nodded sympathetically. Must have been another ex-fiancé who left him when the company nearly went bankrupt and came running back when she found out he'd recovered. An elderly lady nearby let out a chuckle. Two businessmen exchanged amused glances. "You're very direct." Elena forced another smile. "It comes with the job," Lila replied. "When you translate international contracts, you learn to spot suspicious clauses quickly." Ethan stepped closer discreetly. "Lila, the Italian ambassador is looking for you." "Of course." Lila turned to Elena. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Elena. Best of luck with your future projects." As they walked away, Lila heard the elderly lady whisper to her friend, "I like that girl. She's got personality." "That was cruel," Ethan murmured, but he was smiling. "Me?" Lila feigned indignation. "I only answered her questions. Suspicious clauses." "Well, technically she is a suspicious clause, isn't she?" Lila accepted a glass of champagne from a waiter, shows up out of nowhere, trying to renegotiate old terms. Ethan laughed openly. "You just turned my ex-fiancé into a business contract. Works better than I expected." Lila glanced back at Elena, who was now chatting animatedly with others, clearly trying to repair her image. "She'll be fine. People like her always are. And people like you." Lila looked at him, surprised by the sudden seriousness in his voice. "People like me adapt. That's what we do." The rest of the evening passed without further drama. Lila translated conversations, made European diplomats laugh with jokes about cultural differences, and even convinced a Japanese investor to consider expanding business to Boston. On the ride back to the hotel, in the chauffeur-driven car, Ethan finally said, "Thanks for earlier." "For what?" "Lila was taking off her high heels for not letting your ex-fiancé humiliate me in public." "For defending me," he said simply. "You didn't have to do that." Lila was quiet for a moment. She was being cruel. "I don't like pointless cruelty." "Even so, thank you." "You're welcome, boss." Lila looked out the window at the city lights. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you still like her?" Ethan took a moment to answer. "I like the idea of her, the stability, the organized life she represented. And now I realize that stability without honesty is just empty." Lila nodded. "That makes sense. It's hard to build anything lasting on lies." "And you?" Ethan asked. "Have you ever had someone stable?" Lila let out a quiet laugh. "It's hard to find stability when you're working 3 different jobs to pay the bills. Men usually look for women who have time for them." "Time isn't everything." "No," she agreed. "But it helps." They stayed in a comfortable silence until they arrived at the hotel. When the driver stopped, Ethan turned to her. "Lila?" "Yes. Today you were perfect as a translator and as company." "Thank you." Lila felt something different in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. "Thank you for giving me the chance." "The chance is mine," he said quietly. When she stepped out of the car and entered the hotel, Ethan watched until she disappeared into the elevator. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about business strategies or the next day's meetings. He was thinking about how Lila's laughter had lit up an evening he had expected to be just another social obligation, and how somehow she had made him remember who he was before building all those walls. Tokyo at night looked like a city from another planet. Lila was on the hotel balcony watching the glowing Japanese signs flicker when Ethan appeared with 2 cups of hot tea. "I thought you might be cold," he said, offering her a cup. "Thank you." Lila accepted the tea, breathing in its aroma. "Jasmine," the concierge recommended it. Ethan leaned on the railing beside her. He said it's traditional for relaxing after negotiations. "That makes sense." "Today was intense," Lila smiled. "That moment when the main investor started speaking in the Osaka dialect, and you looked at me like you were desperate, was priceless." Ethan laughed. "I thought we were done for. You saved the meeting again." "Luckily, my grandmother had a Japanese friend who taught me a few regional variations," Lila said, taking a sip of tea. "Otherwise, we'd have been in trouble." "Your grandmother had friends from all over the world." "Not exactly." Lila hesitated. "She worked as a cleaner in an international cultural center. She met people from different countries who taught language classes there." Ethan noticed something different in her tone. "How did you really learn so many languages, Lila?" Lila stayed quiet for a moment, watching the city lights. "Do you want the romantic version or the truth?" "The truth. I graduated 5 years ago in linguistics." she began without looking at him. I sent resumes to every translation company, consulate, and publisher I could find. No one ever replied. Why not? Because I had no experience, didn't know anyone important, and my address was in a neighborhood people prefer to pretend doesn't exist. Lila shrugged. You know how it works, Ethan. Networking opens doors. I didn't have any network at all. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. And then I worked wherever I could. Department store, restaurant, office cleaning. Lila listed it as if it were a grocery list. By day, I worked. By night, I studied languages on my own. Why did you keep studying if you couldn't get a job in the field? Lila smiled sadly. Because my grandmother always said knowledge is the one thing no one can take away from you. And because, well, I had hope. Hope for what? That one day a desperate CEO would need someone to translate a fax in French. She looked at him with an ironic smile. Who knew hope sometimes works? Ethan stayed silent, taking it in. You said my grandmother? Your parents? Never met them, Lila replied simply. I was raised in an orphanage until I was 7. And your grandmother? Lila smiled this time genuinely. Grace Harper showed up at the orphanage one day looking for a child to adopt. She was already 60, recently widowed, and wanted company. And she chose you? Actually, I chose her. Lila gave a soft laugh. She was sitting in the courtyard talking with the children. I walked up to her and asked if she could read. When she said yes, I asked her to read a book with me. Which book? Alice in Wonderland. Lila blushed slightly. I was obsessed with stories about people who fell into holes and found different worlds. Ethan smiled. And did she read it? She read the whole book. 2 hours sitting on the floor doing different voices for every character. Lila wiped away a tear that had escaped. At the end, she asked if I wanted to go home with her and hear more stories. And you went. Best decision I ever made. Grace worked as a building janitor during the day and studied accounting at night. She taught me that honest work is nothing to be ashamed of, and that studying is the best revenge against those who doubt you. Ethan felt as if he was truly seeing Lila for the first time. Is she still alive and commenting on my non-existent love life every week? Lila laughed. She lives in a small apartment in the same neighborhood where she raised me. I've been paying her rent since I started working. That's why you work so much. Worked? Lila corrected until a crazy CEO gave me an opportunity I didn't even know I was looking for. Ethan kept looking at her. Yeah. Trying to imagine the 7-year-old girl choosing a stranger to be her family. The 2 0-year-olds sending resumes with no replies, the 2 5-year-old cleaning offices while studying on her own. Lila, yes. I'm sorry. For what? For all the doors that were slammed in your face? For all the people who couldn't see what I see now? Lila looked at him in surprise. Ethan, you don't have to apologize for… Yes, I do, he interrupted, because I'm exactly the kind of person who would have ignored your resume. Rich, well-connected, used to judging by appearances. But you didn't ignore it, Lila said softly. When it mattered, you listened to me, because I was desperate. It doesn't matter why. She turned fully to face him. What matters is you gave me the chance. Ethan studied her in silence. The cold Tokyo wind played with her hair and the city lights reflected in her eyes. Something was happening inside him, something he couldn't name. Can I ask you something? He said finally. Of course. Why did you tell me all this? Lila thought for a moment. Because you asked for real. Most people ask about my story, expecting a simple and interesting answer. You truly wanted to know. And how did you know I truly wanted to know? Because, Lila smiled. A smile unlike any he was used to seeing. For the first time, you weren't looking at me like a CEO looks at an employee. You are looking at me the way one person looks at another. Ethan felt something stir in his chest. And what else do you see when you look at me? Someone who has forgotten what it's like not to have to prove anything to anyone? Lila answered without hesitation. Someone who built walls so high that sometimes he forgets what the world looks like outside them. And do you think it's worth knowing the world outside? Lila tilted her head, studying his face. I think it's worth finding out. They stayed silent, the distant sound of Tokyo traffic filling the space between them. Ethan realized that for the first time in years, he was talking to someone without weighing every word, without thinking about strategies or impressions. Lila, yes. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being worthy of that trust. And when they walked back into the hotel, Both knew something had changed between them. They couldn't quite define what it was, but they knew that from that night on it would be impossible to pretend they were just boss and employee. The next morning in Tokyo, Lila found Ethan in the hotel cafe, staring at a cup of cold coffee. He looked like he hadn't slept much and was absent-mindedly shuffling through papers that clearly weren't getting any real attention. "Good morning, boss." Lila sat down across from him with her breakfast tray. "Are you all right? You look like you fought with your pillow and lost." Ethan lifted his eyes and forced a smile. "Just thinking about today's meeting. The meeting that doesn't exist." Lila bit into a piece of toast. "Because I checked the schedule 3 times and today's a free day." "Oh?" Ethan actually seemed surprised. "You're right." Lila studied him carefully. "Seriously, what's going on? You're acting like you've seen a ghost." "It's complicated. Try me." Lila picked up a slice of melon. "I've got free time and endless patience for complicated things." Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "Last night you talked about trust. It made me think about some things I'd rather forget." "What kind of things?" "Elena," he said simply. Lila nearly choked on her orange juice. "The dramatic ex-fiancée. What about her?" "The whole story." Ethan stirred the cold coffee again. "You only saw the end of the movie. You don't know how it began." "Then tell me the beginning." Lila leaned forward. "I promise I won't make jokes. At least not too many." Ethan chuckled despite the tension. "I met Elena 3 years ago at a charity event. She was stunning, smart, funny, from a well-known family." "Let me guess," Lila said, pretending to think hard. "You fell madly in love, started dating, and she seemed almost too perfect to be true." "Exactly," Ethan confirmed. "We got engaged after a year. I was happy, really happy. But 2 years ago, the company almost went under." Ethan's tone grew serious. "We had invested heavily in a project that failed. We lost key contracts, had to lay off half the staff for 6 months. I thought I was going to lose everything." Lila stopped eating. "And Elena?" "Elena started to reassess our relationship," Ethan said, making air quotes. "She said she needed time to think that things were getting too complicated." Translation: "She was looking for a plan B." "Exactly." Ethan sighed. "She met Marcus Hale at a party. Billionaire, stable company, a family even richer than hers, and she chose the money. She called me on a Tuesday morning," Ethan said, staring out the window. "Told me she'd found someone more compatible with her life goals. She sent the ring back by courier." Lila made a face. "By courier? Seriously? She couldn't even do it in person." "That wasn't the worst part," Ethan continued. "The worst part was that 3 months later, when the company recovered and became profitable again, she tried to come back." "What do you mean, tried to come back?" "She showed up at the office saying she'd made a mistake, that she still loved me." Ethan shook his head. That Marcus was kind, but there was no chemistry between them. Lila couldn't help a small laugh. "She literally wanted to renegotiate the relationship based on your current financial situation." "Basically, yes." "And you?" I said, "No." Ethan looked her straight in the eyes, but the damage was done. "Since then, I've been suspicious of anyone who shows interest in getting close to me." Lila nodded in understanding. "Makes sense. A betrayal like that leaves scars. The problem is, now I analyze everything as if it were a business contract," Ethan admitted. "I keep looking for hidden clauses, ulterior motives, financial interests disguised as feelings, and that's why you were so surprised when I offered to translate the facts." "Exactly. You had nothing to gain. In fact, you had everything to lose if you made a mistake." Ethan gave a faint smile. "It was the first time in 2 years that someone did something for me without expecting anything in return." Lila stayed quiet for a moment, taking it in. "Ethan, can I say something?" "Of course. Elena was a fool." Ethan almost spit out his coffee. "Lila, what? She was?" Lila waved her toast for emphasis. "Who leaves a good man over money, then tries to come back when things improve? That's not love. That's a financial investment. You don't really know her." "I know enough." Lila cut in. "I saw how she looked at you at the gala dinner, like a stock that had gone up in value, not like a person she loved." Ethan watched her speak, admiring the genuine outrage in her voice. "And you know what else?" Lila went on. "She did you a favor." "How so?" "She showed you who she really was before it was too late." Lila leaned forward. Imagine if you two had married, and she did that later, when you had kids. A house, years of life together. Ethan had never thought about it that way. You're right. Of course I am. Lila smiled. And another thing, Mr. Carter. What is it? Lila looked him in the eyes. Serious. I don't want anything from you. Not money, not status, not a glamorous life. I just want respect. Lila, I mean it. She went on. You could be a millionaire or go broke tomorrow. It wouldn't change anything for me. I was working as a cleaner, and I was fine. I can go back to being a cleaner if I have to. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. You really believe that? I believe it because it's true. Lila shrugged. My grandmother taught me that dignity has no price, and that people are worth what their character is, not what's in their bank account. They looked at each other in silence. Ethan felt like he was seeing Lila, truly seeing her for the first time. Not the competent employee, not the talented translator, but the woman who had just shattered years of mistrust with a few simple, honest words. Lila, I. Ethan's phone rang sharp and urgent. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's the office. Emergency, he said, answering. Ethan Carter. Lila watched his expression change as he listened to the voice on the other end. When did this happen? Ethan asked, growing tense. No, don't make any decisions until I get there. We'll catch the next flight. He hung up and looked at Lila with regret. Problems? Big ones? Ethan sighed. We have to go back to Boston immediately. Lila nodded. But they both knew something important had been interrupted. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words, with a moment that had almost happened. Lila, yes. Thank you for reminding me that not everyone is like Elena. And thank you for trusting me enough to tell me the truth. And as they quickly packed their bags, both knew that the conversation had changed something fundamental between them. They just didn't know exactly what. Lila was shopping at the neighborhood market when she decided to stop at Donna Maria Cafe for a coffee before heading home. It was Saturday morning, her first day off in 2 weeks, and she planned to spend the rest of the day organizing her apartment and watching old movies with her grandmother. When she stepped into the small, cozy cafe, she almost bumped into the waitress carrying a cup of coffee when she saw Ethan sitting alone at a corner table reading a newspaper and drinking coffee like an entirely ordinary person. Ethan? She asked, walking over. What are you doing here? He looked up just as surprised. Lila, I live nearby. You live in this neighborhood? Lila couldn't hide her surprise. Really? I have an apartment here, Ethan said, folding his newspaper. I bought it a few years ago when I wanted a place to get away from the corporate world. Lila laughed. You have a secret hideout? Something like that? He smiled, looking slightly embarrassed. Want to sit down, or do you have important plans? My only plan today is to convince my grandmother she doesn't need to cook for an entire army just because it's Saturday. Lila pulled out a chair. I've got time. The waitress came over. A woman in her 50s with a warm, motherly smile. Hi, dear, Lila greeted. The usual. Yes, please, Mrs. Carmen. Coffee with milk and sugar bread. And for the handsome young man, Ethan blushed slightly. Just more coffee, please. You two make a lovely couple. Mrs., Carmen said as she set the table. How long have you been together? Lila almost choked. Actually, Thank you, Ethan interrupted, smiling at the woman. When Mrs. Carmen walked away, Lila looked at him curiously. Why didn't you correct her? Because she seems like the type who would ask questions for another 20 minutes if I explained our real situation, Ethan replied. Oh, so you work together? What company? He's your boss. You travel together? How interesting. Lila laughed out loud. How long have you known Mrs. Carmen? 3 years. And yes, she really does that kind of interrogation. So, you've been coming here for 3 years and she's never known you're the CEO of a multinational. To her, I'm Alex, the quiet guy who likes strong coffee and reads the paper on Saturdays. Ethan seemed to like the thought. It's refreshing to just be a normal person for a few hours. Carmen came back with their orders and a tray of homemade cookies. On the house for the lovely couple, she said with a wink, then walked away. Lila picked up a cookie. So, Alex, the quiet guy, what do you do when you're not being a CEO? Lately. Think about work, he admitted. Not very exciting. And before you became a workaholic, Ethan thought for a moment. I used to play guitar. Really? Lila perked up. What kind of music? Mostly classic rock, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, Eagles. He smiled nostalgically. My father hated it, said music didn't pay the bills. And you stopped gradually. College, work, responsibilities. Ethan shrugged. And you? What hobbies does a multilingual translator have? Cooking? Lila answered without hesitation. I love trying recipes from different countries. Last week, I tried making ramen from scratch. How did it go? A complete disaster, she laughed. The noodles got sticky, the broth had no flavor, and I even broke a bowl. My grandmother ordered pizza in the end. What's been your most successful recipe? Sicilian cannoli, Lila said proudly. It took me 3 tries, but I nailed it. My grandmother said it was better than the Italian bakery down the street. Impressive. I can barely make instant noodles without burning them. Instant noodles can't burn, Ethan. It's literally boiling water. You underestimate my ability to ruin food, he laughed. Once I tried making scrambled eggs and somehow set the frying pan on fire. How do you set a pan on fire making eggs? Natural talent. They kept talking, the conversation flowing easily from cooking to movies, from music to childhood memories. Ethan told her about the mischief he got into at boarding school, and Lila shared stories about her adventures with her grandmother. Grace, your grandmother sounds amazing, Ethan said after Lila told him how Grace had taught her to drive in an empty supermarket parking lot. She's my hero. Lila smiled. She raised a child alone, worked her whole life, and still had the energy to help me with homework every night. Would you like me to meet her someday? The question came naturally that they both felt its weight. Lila looked at Ethan, trying to figure out if he was speaking as a boss interested in his employee's life or as something else. She would love to meet you, Lila answered carefully, especially after I told her you gave me a chance when no one else would. What else did you tell her about me? That you're fair, intelligent, and have a better sense of humor than you let on. Lila paused. And that you seem very lonely sometimes. Ethan stayed quiet, stirring his coffee. Perceptive. It comes with the job. When you translate, you learn to read between the lines. At that moment, an elderly lady from the next table came over with a radiant smile. Sorry to bother you, she said, holding a phone. You two are such a lovely couple. May I take a picture? I want to show my granddaughter that true love still exists. Lila opened her mouth to explain, but Ethan leaned closer to her. Of course, he said to the lady. Get a little closer, dears, the lady instructed. Ethan slipped his arm around Lila's shoulders, and she naturally leaned against him. The flash went off twice. Perfect, the lady clapped. You're going to have a beautiful wedding. When she walked away, Lila and Ethan stayed in that position for a few seconds longer than necessary. Lila could feel the warmth of his arm around her shoulders, the faint scent of his cologne. Sorry, Ethan stepped back first. I didn't want to embarrass her. It's fine, Lila replied, feeling a strange sense of loss when he pulled his arm away. Lila, yes. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Have you ever thought about us as more than just boss and employee? The question hung in the air like a confession. Lila felt her heart race. Ethan. Sorry, he raised his hands. I shouldn't have asked. It's too complicated. No, Lila interrupted him. It's not that it's complicated. It's just that I've been thinking about it too. They looked at each other across the small cafe table, the morning chatter around them fading away. For the first time, there were no contracts to translate, no meetings to attend, no formalities to keep. And now, Ethan asked softly. Now, Lila smiled, feeling brave. Now you tell me more about those guitar songs. And maybe if you behave, I'll teach you how to make cannoli without destroying the kitchen. Ethan laughed, feeling something light and happy expand in his chest. Deal. And when they left the cafe 2 hours later, they both knew something fundamental had changed. They couldn't quite define what it was, but for the first time, the idea of something more didn't feel scary. It felt possible. Lila was in the middle of a particularly complicated translation about European banking regulations. When her phone rang, she glanced at the screen and frowned at an unfamiliar number. Lila Harper, she answered professionally. Miss Harper, this is Boston General Hospital. Your grandmother, Grace Harper, was admitted about an hour ago. Lila's world froze. What? What happened? She collapsed in the supermarket. She's stable, but we need you to come here as soon as possible. Lila hung up with trembling hands, already grabbing her bag and jacket. Ethan, who was reviewing contracts at the table next to hers, noticed the sudden movement. "Lila, what happened?" "My grandmother's in the hospital," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I need to go now." Ethan stood up immediately. "I'm coming with you." "You don't have to." "I can." "Lila," he said firmly, "I'm coming with you." In the car, Lila couldn't stop tapping her fingers on her knee. Ethan drove with focus, canceling meetings through the Bluetooth. "Victor, cancel everything this afternoon." "Family emergency," he told his assistant. "And call Dr. Mitchell. Ask if he can check on a patient at General Hospital. Tell him it's urgent." "Lila, you don't need to call your private doctor," she protested. "Dr. Mitchell is a cardiologist. If your grandmother fainted, it's best to be sure." He glanced at her quickly. "Does she have a history of heart problems?" "High blood pressure, but nothing serious." Lila bit her lip. "At least that's what she always told me." "Is Grace the kind of grandmother who hides health problems so the family won't worry?" "Exactly." My aside. "Last month, she said she was just a little tired. Later I found out she had worked double shifts for a whole week because a coworker didn't show up." Ethan shook his head. "Sounds like someone I know." "I don't hide things, Lila. You worked with the flu for 3 days last week until I sent you home by force. That's different." "Of course it is." At the hospital, Lila practically ran to the reception desk. Grace Harper admitted today. "Room 237, second floor," the receptionist said. They went up in the elevator in silence. Lila was clearly nervous, fidgeting with her hands and breathing unevenly. "She's going to be fine," Ethan said gently. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Grace raised you, dealt with bureaucratic orphanages, and worked double shifts at 70. He smiled. "Women like that are indestructible." Lila smiled for the first time since the call. "You don't even know her." "I know you, and you could only have been raised by someone extraordinary." In the room, Grace was sleeping, hooked up to a few monitors but looking peaceful. Lila walked up to the bed and held her grandmother's hand. "Hi, Grandma," she whispered. "It's me." Ethan stayed back a little, feeling like he was intruding on such a private moment. But Lila looked at him. "Come here," she said. "She'll want to meet you." He stepped closer cautiously. Grace had messy gray hair, a wrinkled but kind face, and calloused hands from a lifetime of work. "She looks like you," Ethan said. "Actually, I look like her," Lila corrected. 15 years together, you end up imitating each other." At that moment, Grace slowly opened her eyes. She blinked a few times, getting her bearings until she focused on Lila. "Lila, my dear," she said in a hoarse voice. "What a scare you gave me." "That scare was yours, Grandma." Lila squeezed her hand tighter. "You fainted in the supermarket." "Nonsense." Grace tried to sit up. "I just felt a little dizzy. I should have had breakfast." "Grace Harper." Lila used a firm tone. "Did you have breakfast?" "I had half a cup of coffee." "Food." "Grandma." "Food. I was going to eat after shopping." Grace defended herself, then noticed Ethan standing beside the bed. "And who's this handsome young man?" Lila blushed. "Grandma, this is Ethan Carter, my boss." Grace studied Ethan from head to toe with sharp eyes. "So you're the famous Ethan famous." Ethan looked at Lila, amused. "Lila talks about you every week." Grace smiled mischievously. "Ethan said this, Ethan did that. We went to Paris, we went to Japan." "Grandma." Lila was bright red. "What?" Grace feigned innocence. "I'm just repeating what you say." Ethan was clearly enjoying himself. "And what else does she say?" "Well," Grace settled more comfortably in bed, ignoring Lila's death stare. "She says, you're smart, fair, and handsome." "I never said he was handsome," Lila protested. "No." Grace pretended to be surprised. "Then I must have imagined it when you said he has interesting eyes and doesn't smile much, but when he does, it lights up the whole room." Ethan burst out laughing. Lila wanted to disappear. "Grandma, please." And she also said, "You treat her with respect, which is rare these days." Grace continued. "Now more serious. That you gave her a chance when no one else would." "That was easy," Ethan replied sincerely. "Lila is exceptional." "I know." Grace smiled. "I raised her, didn't I?" At that moment, Doctor, Mitchell appeared at the door. Sorry to interrupt. I'm Dr. Mitchell, cardiologist. Cardiologist? Grace looked at Ethan. You called a cardiologist for me, just to make sure everything's okay, Ethan explained. Grace looked from Ethan to Lila, then back to Ethan. Wait a second. You canceled your appointments, came to the hospital, and called your personal doctor to take care of your employee's grandmother. Well, yes. Grace broke into a wide smile. Lila, dear, could you step out for a minute? I'd like to talk to this young man. Grandma, no. Just for a minute. Lila reluctantly stepped out, leaving Ethan alone with Grace, who studied him like a detective, sizing up a suspect. So, Grace finally said, You like my granddaughter? It wasn't a question. Yes, Ethan answered honestly. Very much. And are you planning to do something about it or just keep stalling? Ethan laughed nervously. Mrs. Grace, it's complicated. Nonsense, she interrupted. Either you like her or you don't. Either she's special or she's just another employee. Ethan paused, searching for the words. She's the most genuine person I've ever met. And I'm in love with her, he admitted. Surprised to hear himself say it out loud, Grace clapped her hands, delighted. Wonderful. So, you're the rich boyfriend I've always dreamed of for her. Rich boyfriend? Lila needs someone who will take good care of her, Grace explained. She spent her life taking care of me, sacrificing opportunities. She deserves someone who truly values her. I value her. And who has enough money so she never has to worry about bills again. Grace added matter-of-factly. Victor Lang, the same executive who had tried to humiliate her months earlier, was speaking in a low voice on the phone far too often and always hung up when someone came near. No, the deal has to be changed before tomorrow's meeting, she overheard him say while hidden behind a hotel lobby column. Ethan can't know about this until it's too late. Lila frowned. That didn't sound good. The next morning, over breakfast, she decided to investigate. While Ethan chatted with other executives, Lila casually walked over to the table where Victor had left his briefcase. Sorry, she said to Victor, accidentally spilling coffee on the table. How clumsy of me. While he stood up to grab napkins, Lila quickly glanced at the papers inside the briefcase. What she saw made her actually choke on her coffee. There were documents with unauthorized changes, printed emails of conversations between Victor and the competition, and what appeared to be a modified version of the contract scheduled to be signed that day. Are you okay? Victor returned with the napkins, looking nervous. Perfect, Lila said with an innocent smile. I'm just a bit clumsy before my first coffee. She spent the rest of the morning acting normal while her mind raced. Victor was sabotaging the company, but she needed solid proof before accusing anyone. During lunch, Lila pretended to have a headache and returned to the hotel while everyone else was still at the restaurant. She knew Victor kept documents in the safe in his room, but she also knew he was the kind of person who wrote down passwords in obvious places. She went up to his floor and with some luck, found a housekeeper cleaning the hallway. Excuse me, she said in Spanish to the woman. I forgot my room key. Could you help me? The friendly housekeeper opened Victor's room without suspecting a thing. Lila quickly went inside and started searching. She found a notepad next to the phone with some suspicious notes. Transfer files. Blue pen drive. Competitor meeting 3 p.m. Modify clause 7. Before signing, she took photos of everything with her phone and left the room before anyone noticed. That afternoon in the meeting, Lila watched Victor closely. He seemed nervous, constantly fiddling with the blue pen drive he kept in his briefcase. When it was time to review the final contract, Lila asked to see the documents. Of course, Victor said, handing over the papers with a forced smile. Everything is in order. Lila read quickly, and her suspicion was confirmed. Clause 7 had been changed in a subtle but significant way. Instead of profit for Carter and Hale, it now said 5%. Ethan, she said calmly, can I speak with you for a minute privately? Of course. Ethan excused himself to the Chicago investors. Well, be right back. In the hallway, Lila showed him the photos she had taken. Victor is selling information to the competition and altering contracts, she explained quickly. Look at this. Ethan examined the evidence, his expression growing more serious. Are you sure? Absolutely. Lila pointed to the pen drive in the photos. He's been carrying this for days. I bet it has all our data in it. How did you find all this out? Lila blushed slightly. Let's just say I've learned some unconventional investigation techniques. You went into his room. Technically, the housekeeper opened it. I just walked in. Ethan looked at her impressed. You're terrible and brilliant. Thank you. They returned to the meeting room. Ethan sat down calmly and pretended to review the documents. Victor, he said casually, can you explain why Clause 7 was changed? Victor turned pale. Changed? It wasn't changed. Of course it was, Ethan said, showing him the paper. Yesterday it was 15%. Today it's 5%. An interesting change. It must have been a typing error. And this pen drive, Ethan pointed to the blue object on the table. What's on it? They're personal documents. Are you sure? Lila stepped in, showing the photos on her phone. Because your notes here say transfer files. Blue pen drive. The silence in the room was heavy. The Chicago investors looked from one person to another, confused. Victor tried to grab the pen drive, but Ethan was faster. Thomas, Ethan called to one of the assistants. Can you plug this into the laptop and see what's in it? Ethan, you can't do that, Victor protested. Actually, I can, Ethan replied coldly. Article 15 of your employment contract. All devices used on business trips can be checked by the company. Thomas plugged in the pen drive and let out a disbelieving laugh. It has all our contracts here plus emails with, he read from the screen. Hale Industries. The competition, Lila explained to the puzzled investors. He was selling information. Victor turned red. I can explain. No need, Ethan said, standing up. Security, please escort Mr. Lang out of the building. He no longer works with us. Ethan, wait. Victor tried to argue as he was led away. You don't understand. They offered me double my salary. Oh, I understand perfectly, Ethan replied. You chose money over loyalty. Sounds familiar. When Victor left, the Chicago investors applauded. Impressive investigative work. The head of the delegation said, you two work very well together as a team. Lila and Ethan exchanged glances. There was something in the air, a tension different from the usual. After everyone left the room, they stayed behind, tidying up the papers. Lila, Ethan said softly. Thank you. You saved the company again. I just did my job. No, he stepped closer. You did much more than that. You protected me. Lila felt her heart race. Ethan was standing so close, looking at her in a way that made her legs feel weak. Ethan. Lila, I need to tell you something. He came even closer. It's been a while since Congratulations. The door burst open and Thomas walked in with a bottle of champagne. What a team. You have to celebrate. Ethan and Lila quickly stepped apart, both frustrated by the interruption. Thomas, Ethan said through clenched teeth. Perfect timing. Thank you, boss. Thomas, completely unaware of the tension, began opening the bottle. This story will be company legend, the translator who became a detective. Lila laughed nervously. Just luck. Not luck. Thomas kept going, full of energy. You two are unbeatable. Ethan looked at Lila, frustration and amusement mixing in his eyes. Yes, an unbeatable team. Lila knew exactly what he was thinking, and she knew that once again, the moment had slipped away. But she also knew that the next time they were alone, there would be no Thomas, no phones, and no emergencies to interrupt them. At least that's what she hoped. Lila, Ethan whispered as Thomas struggled with the cork. Yes, this conversation isn't over. I know. She smiled. I know. And when the cork finally popped, they both raised their glasses, knowing that some things were worth waiting for, even if the wait was becoming almost unbearable. The Monday after the Chicago incident, Ethan had been in the office since 0 inches the morning. He'd spent the entire weekend thinking about the conversation with Lila that had been cut short, and he had reached a conclusion. It was time to stop stalling. Lila arrived at her usual time, greeted everyone politely, and headed to her desk as if nothing had happened. But Ethan noticed she avoided looking directly at him. By about 10, he couldn't take it anymore. Lila, can you come to my office? He asked, trying to sound casual. Of course, boss, she replied, picking up her notepad. Is this about the Chicago meeting report? Not exactly. In the office, Lila sat in her usual chair, pen ready, her expression perfectly professional. Ethan remained standing, nervously fidgeting with a paperweight. "Lila, I'd like to invite you to something. If it's about extra work, go ahead. I'm available." "It's not work." Ethan took a deep breath. "There's an international conference in Rome next month on the future of global business, very prestigious. And you need a translator?" Lila began to write. "How many days?" "I can check my schedule." "Lila," Ethan interrupted, "you wouldn't be going as the translator, you'd be my special guest." Lila stopped writing and slowly looked up. "Special guest as my date?" Ethan said, swallowing hard. "Personal, not professional." The silence that followed was so tense Ethan could hear his own heartbeat. Lila carefully closed her notepad. "Ethan, are you asking me out on a date in Rome?" "I'm asking you." He hesitated to see where this could go. Lila stayed quiet for so long that Ethan began to wonder if she'd even understood the question. "Do you want an honest answer?" she finally asked. "Of course." Lila stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "Can I ask you something first?" "You can." "What exactly do you want from me, Ethan?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean? I'm your employee," Lila went on, still with her back to him. "You're my boss. We come from completely different worlds. And now you want to take me to Rome as your special guest. I thought we had something." "We do." Lila turned to face him. "The question is what exactly?" Ethan looked at her confused. "Lila, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be." "I'm being realistic." She cut in. "Do you want to date me? Have a serious relationship? Or do you just want an interesting fling with the employee who saved your company a few times?" Ethan opened and closed his mouth. "Why does it have to be so complicated?" "Because it is," Lila gestured. "Have you even thought about what happens if it goes wrong? I lose my job, my reputation, and you're still the billionaire CEO." "You wouldn't lose your job." "Of course I would." Lila let out a humorless laugh. "Do you really think I could keep working here after a failed relationship? That the other executives would respect me? That I could get another job anywhere after everyone knew I got involved with the boss?" Ethan stayed silent, realizing he hadn't considered those consequences. "And there's more," Lila continued. "Are you sure about your feelings, or are you just interested in the novelty in the woman who isn't impressed by your money?" "Lila, that's not fair." "Not fair." She laughed bitterly. "You know what's not fair? That I'm in love with you." Ethan's heart stopped. "You are?" "I am?" Lila admitted, her eyes filling with tears. "And that's exactly why I can't go to Rome." "I don't understand." "Because if this is just a fling for you, it will break me. And if it's real but ends badly, it will still break me. Just in a different way." Ethan stepped closer to her. "Lila, let me explain." "No." She held up her hand. "Let me finish. You're a good man, Ethan. Smart, fair, and yes, I like you a lot. But you're also my boss. You're rich, powerful, and you live in a world where people do things because it's convenient. You think you're convenient for me? I think you still don't know the difference." Lila picked up her bag, "And that's why I'm resigning." Ethan felt like he'd been punched. "What?" "I'll wrap up the current projects this week and train my replacement," Lila said in a professional tone, though he could see she was struggling to keep her composure. "It'll be a smooth transition." "Lila, you can't just—" "I can and I will." She headed for the door. "It's the only way to protect my dignity and our friendship." "Friendship?" Ethan repeated, incredulous. "You just said you're in love with me." "I am." Lila stopped at the door without turning around. "And that's exactly why I need to leave before this turns into a mess we can't clean up." "Lila, wait." Ethan followed her. "We can talk about this. Find a solution." "There's no solution, Ethan." She finally turned, and he saw she was crying. "You want me to go to Rome as your special guest, but you can't tell me what that means. You want me to risk everything without giving me any kind of assurance. Life doesn't give assurances." "Yes, it does." Lila gave a sad smile. "It gives honesty, clarity, and respect. And when someone invites you to cross the world, they should at least know why." Ethan watched her walk out of the office, closing the door softly behind her. He stood there for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. He had planned a romantic invitation to Rome. Instead, He got a resignation. On his desk, the phone rang. It was his assistant. "Mr. Carter, the 11 meeting is waiting." "Cancel it," Ethan said, still staring at the closed door. "Sir, cancel all today's meetings." He sat down in the chair, buried his head in his hands, and tried to figure out how he had managed to ruin everything so completely. Lila had been right. He didn't know what he wanted. He knew he liked her, admired her, felt alive when he was with her. But when she asked him directly what he wanted, he hadn't been able to answer, and now she was leaving. On the other side of the door, Lila went back to her desk and began sorting files with trembling hands. Some co-workers glanced at her curiously, but she kept her head down. She had done the right thing. She knew she had done the right thing. So why did it feel like she had just thrown away the best thing that had ever happened in her life? Ethan was packing for Rome when he found a white envelope tucked among his work papers. His name was written in Lila's familiar handwriting, and his stomach turned. He sat on the bed and carefully opened the letter. "Ethan, you'll probably only read this when you're in Rome, and that's for the best. I want you to enjoy the trip without worrying about our mess. Thank you for giving me the chance of a lifetime. When you hired me, I was just a desperate cleaning lady. You turned me into a respected professional. That's worth more than any salary. I never wanted anything from you except respect and recognition for my work. I think I got both. It may not seem like it, but I'm grateful for everything, even the confusing moments. I hope you find someone who deserves everything you have to give, and I hope that when it happens, you know exactly what you want from her. With affection and no regrets, Lila P.S. The new translator is competent. Just don't let her reorganize your files. She has an obsession with alphabetical order." Ethan read the letter 3 times before he could fully process it. Lila had managed to be kind, professional, and devastating all at once. In Rome, the conference was a professional success and a personal disaster. Ethan kept glancing at the empty chair beside him during every lecture, imagining how Lila would have commented on the pretentious presentations or laughed at the other CEOs trying to impress each other. At the gala dinner, he was approached by several elegant executives who were clearly interested. But all he could think about was how Lila had once dismantled Elena with wit and humor. "Mr. Carter," a French businesswoman approached. "May I sit?" "Of course," Ethan replied automatically, but his mind was elsewhere. "You seem distracted," she remarked. "Business problems? Problems with translation?" Ethan answered, realizing how foolish that sounded. On the 3rd day, he gave up. He canceled the remaining meetings and caught the first flight back to Boston. On the plane, he reread Lila's letter and finally understood what she had been trying to say. She didn't want assurances because she was insecure. She wanted assurances because she was smart enough to know the difference between interest and love. And he had offered interest when she deserved love. Back in Boston, Ethan didn't go home or to the office. He went straight to the neighborhood where Lila lived, a place he had never visited, but that she had mentioned many times. He found the address, an old but well-kept building with small gardens in front of each apartment. It was Thursday afternoon, and he hoped she would be home. He went up to the 3rd floor and hesitated in front of door 3B. He could hear music from inside, something that sounded like French jazz. He took a deep breath and knocked. The music stopped. Footsteps came toward the door. "Who is it?" "It's me, Ethan." Silence. Then the sound of several locks being opened. Lila appeared at the door wearing jeans and a simple blouse. Her hair pulled back casually, face without makeup. She looked beautiful in a way that made his heart race. "What are you doing here?" she asked, surprised. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Or would you rather I declare myself out here in the hallway for all your neighbors to hear?" Lila opened the door wider, letting him in. The apartment was small but cozy, filled with books, plants, and photos. It smelled like coffee, and something that reminded him of cannoli. "How did you find me?" "Human resources," Ethan admitted, "and maybe a bit of obsessive determination. You came back from Rome early." "Rome was a mistake," he said simply. "I should have been here." Lila crossed her arms, defensive. "Ethan, if you came here to try to convince me to go back to work—" "I didn't," he interrupted. "I came to invite you to dinner. I already told you." "As Ethan, not as your ex-boss," he clarified. "As the man who read your letter 15 times and finally got the message." Lila studied him cautiously. "What message?" "That you deserve someone who knows exactly what they want." Ethan stepped closer. "And I do." "No, what?" "But I want you. he said without hesitation. Not as an employee, not as a fling, not out of convenience. I want you as the woman who reminded me what it's like to truly laugh, as the person who saved me from bad contracts and for myself. Lila felt her eyes well up. Ethan, I want you because you're brave enough to call me out when I'm wrong and smart enough to save me when I'm lost, he went on. I want you because when I'm with you, I don't have to be the perfect CEO. I can just be me. And who are you? Lila asked softly. A man who's completely in love with a woman who lives in a small apartment, makes cannoli better than any Italian bakery, and can turn any tense moment into a comedy. Ethan smiled. A man who wants to spend the rest of his life discovering new things about this incredible woman. Lila wiped away a tear that had escaped. You really read my letter 15 times. 16, actually, Ethan admitted until I had it memorized. And what do you want from me now? Everything, he said honestly. I want to meet your grandmother officially. I want you to teach me how to make cannoli without setting the kitchen on fire. I want to travel the world with you, translating things while I try not to ruin important contracts. And what about work? You can go back if you want, or find something better, or start your own business? Ethan shrugged. I just want to be in your life, not control it. Lila looked at him for a long moment. You're sure about that? I'm sure I love you, Ethan said, finally putting all his cards on the table. I'm sure you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I'm sure I don't want another day without you. Lila smiled. The first genuine smile Ethan had seen from her in weeks. In that case, she said, stepping closer, I think I can accept that dinner invitation. Really? But only if you promise me one thing. Anything? No fancy restaurants? Lila said with a playful smile. I want you to take me to the simplest place you know. Deal? Ethan laughed. I know a place that serves the best burger in the city. Perfect. They looked at each other for a moment, the air charged with anticipation and nervousness. Lila, yes. Can I kiss you now, or are you going to find another excuse to make me wait? Lila laughed and stepped even closer. I think you've waited long enough. When they finally kissed, Ethan knew every moment of confusion had been worth it, because that kiss wasn't ambiguous at all. It tasted like certainty, like the future, and like cannoli. 6 months later, Lila was back at Carter & Hale, this time as Director of International Relations. She had built an entire department dedicated to translation and cultural communication, and the company had never closed so many international contracts. Lila, the German ambassador, is on line 3. Her assistant, Sarah, announced something about changes to the Berlin contract. Put him through. Lila picked up the phone and began speaking in fluent German while taking notes. In 15 minutes, she had solved a problem that had been holding up negotiations for weeks. Ethan stood at her office door, smiling. In 6 months of officially dating, he had learned that Lila was even more impressive when she had full independence at work. All set, Lila said, hanging up and turning to him. What is it? You have that look like you want something. I have a look like I want something. Yes, you do. It's the same look you have when you want me to translate urgent documents, or when you're trying to convince me to try restaurants with more forks than they should have. Ethan laughed. Actually, I want to invite you to Friday's charity event. The company one. Lila frowned. I'm already going. I'm organizing the reception for the international guests. Remember? I know that. Ethan walked over to her desk. I want to invite you as my girlfriend, not as an employee. Oh, Lila smiled. In that case, I accept, but only if you promise not to introduce me as the employee who became my girlfriend. Deal. I'll introduce you as the woman who saved my company and my sanity. Much better. On Friday, the event was packed. Lila moved among the guests, speaking in different languages and making sure everyone felt included. Ethan watched her from a distance, still impressed by how easily she made anyone feel important. She's amazing, said Dr. David Mitchell, who had become a friend of the couple after the hospital incident with Grace. She is, Ethan agreed. Sometimes I still can't believe she chose to stay with me. I'm sure she thinks the same thing. Later, it was time for the speeches. Ethan stepped onto the stage and waited for the room to grow quiet. Good evening, everyone, he began. Usually these events are about numbers, results, and future projections. Tonight, I want to talk about something different. About translation. Lila, who was helping arrange the dessert table with the staff, stopped to listen. "You all know our company has been working with translation for years," Ethan continued. "But I recently learned there's a kind of translation far harder than any foreign language, a translation of truth." The audience murmured with interest. Lila began to feel nervous about where this was going. "A year ago, a cleaning lady saved our company by translating a French contract," Ethan said with a smile. "But what she really did was translate my own blindness into reality." Lila felt her heart race. "Oh no," she murmured. "He's not going to do what I think he's going to do." "Lila Harper," Ethan said, searching for her in the crowd. "You taught me the most difficult language in the world, the language of truth. You taught me that trust isn't a contract you sign once, but a choice you make every day." Lila stood frozen in the middle of the hall, all eyes on her. "You taught me that true love doesn't come with escape clauses," Ethan went on, stepping down from the stage and walking toward her. "And that some translations are worth more than any $1,000,000 contract." "Ethan, what are you doing?" Lila whispered as he stopped in front of her. "A business proposal," he said with a smile, taking a small box from his pocket. "With very specific terms." The entire room gasped in surprise as Ethan knelt down. "Lila Harper," he said, opening the box, to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "Will you be my partner for life with equal rights, shared decisions, and profits paid in laughter, adventures, and burnt cannoli?" Lila was laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you proposing to me by comparing it to a business contract?" "I'm proposing in the language you understand best," Ethan smiled. "So, do you accept the terms?" "Yes," Lila shouted. "I accept all the terms." The room burst into applause as Ethan slipped the ring on her finger and stood to kiss her. "That was the nerdiest and most romantic thing I've ever seen." Lila laughed through her tears. "I learned from the best translator in the city." 3 months later, in the small neighborhood church where Lila grew up, they were married, surrounded by family, friends, and half the staff of Carter and Hale. Grace, now 75 and more sarcastic than ever, was chosen to carry the rings. "Are you sure you want me to do this?" she asked during rehearsal. "I could trip, drop the rings, or yell something embarrassing." "Grandma," Lila reassured her, "you're not going to do any of that. I promise not to trip," Grace said with a wink. On the wedding day, Grace walked down the aisle with perfect dignity, carrying the rings on a small pillow. When she reached the altar and handed them over, she couldn't help herself. "I knew it," she shouted to the whole church. "I knew they'd get married." The entire church erupted in laughter. The priest waited for the noise to settle before continuing the ceremony. After the traditional vows, Ethan pulled a document from the folder carried by his best man. "Lila, since our story started with contracts, I thought I'd create a new one," he said, unfolding the paper. "Our personal marriage contract." "You actually made a real contract?" Lila asked in disbelief as she took the paper. It had an official header, perfect legal formatting, and a single clause in the middle of the page. "Carter Harper Marriage Contract Sole Clause. We choose each other every day." Lila read it out loud and began to laugh. "You're ridiculous and perfect. Will you sign it?" "Only if you accept an amendment," Lila said, taking the pen he offered. "What amendment?" "Is not of PR on the tange and deflafe." She scribbled something under the clause and showed him. "P.S. And when he burns the food, we order pizza." Ethan laughed out loud. "I accept the terms." They signed the symbolic contract as the guests applauded. Grace, emotional, shouted again, "Now it's official." Later at the reception, as they danced their first song as husband and wife, Lila whispered in Ethan's ear, "So, Mr. Carter, how does it feel to be the majority shareholder of my heart?" "Actually, Mrs. Carter," he twirled her gracefully, "I think we're equal partners, 50/50 on profits and losses. And if there's a loss—" "Impossible," Ethan said, kissing her softly. "We've invested in the best assets, love, laughter, and a translator who can save any situation. Even from stubborn CEOs who don't know how to ask for help, especially those." And as they danced, surrounded by family and friends, they both knew they had signed the best contract of their lives, a contract with no fine print, no escape clauses, and just one guarantee: to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. Grace, watching from the head table, raised her champagne glass. "To Lila and Ethan," she called out, "they've proven that true love is just like a perfect translation. When it feels natural, you know it's right. That is not of modern from. And the entire party toasted, agreeing that some translations are definitely worth more than $80 million.